Diane's flashlight beam catches something impossible in the garden shed at 2 in the morning. A small brown hand pressing against dirt from inside the wooden crate. She drops to her knees, clawing at the soil with bare fingers. The child beneath makes no sound. 8 years she has cleaned this mansion. 8 years she has been invisible to everyone except this little boy. Now Elijah is dying 6 feet below her, and the fresh roses planted above him still smell like the wedding bouquet Miss Veronica ordered yesterday. The rehearsal dinner ended 3 hours ago. Diane tears at the earth with a desperate fury she did not know lived inside her 42-year-old body, her fingernails breaking against rocks and roots as she digs deeper into the crate that someone has buried in the corner of the garden shed, behind the clay pots and bags of fertilizer. The wood splinters under her hands, and finally she feels fabric, the soft cotton of pajamas, and she pulls with everything she has until Elijah's small body comes free from the dirt that fills his nose and mouth. He is not breathing. His lips are blue in the flashlight beam, and his eyes are closed. And for one terrible moment Diane thinks she is too late, that she has failed this child who called her Miss Diane with such trust, who saved her his chocolate chip cookies from lunch, who asked her about her daughter Maya and remembered her birthday. She lays him flat on the shed floor and tilts his head back the way she learned from those YouTube videos she watched late at night when she could not sleep, when the insomnia that has plagued her since her husband died kept her awake in her small Stamford apartment. She pinches his nose and breathes into his small mouth once, twice, 3 times, and then she starts compressions on his narrow chest, counting out loud in the darkness. 30 compressions and 2 breaths, 30 compressions and 2 breaths, and she is crying and praying and counting all at once. On the 4th round, Elijah coughs and vomits dirt and bile onto the floor and gasps for air with a sound like tearing paper. Diane pulls him into her arms and he is breathing. Shallow and wet, but breathing. And she fumbles for her phone with shaking hands and dials 911. The operator's voice is calm and professional and asks her questions she can barely answer through her sobs. And she says, "A child has been buried alive. He was in a crate in the garden shed. He is breathing now, but he needs help. Please send someone now." And she gives the address that everyone in Greenwich knows, the Chen estate on Round Hill Road. The ambulance arrives in 12 minutes that feel like 12 hours, and the paramedics take Elijah from her arms and put an oxygen mask on his face and load him onto a stretcher, and Diane climbs into the ambulance with them because she will not leave this child alone. At Greenwich Hospital, the emergency room erupts into controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses surrounding Elijah's stretcher, calling out medical terms Diane does not understand, and she stands against the wall trying to stay out of the way, her hands still caked with dirt and her uniform torn at the knees. Marcus Chen arrives 30 minutes later, his face gray with panic, still wearing his tuxedo from the rehearsal dinner, and he pushes past the nurses to get to his son. Veronica Ashford arrives 10 minutes after that, her blonde hair perfect despite the late hour, wearing a silk robe over designer pajamas, and she puts her hand on Marcus' shoulder with exactly the right amount of concern in her blue eyes. Diane tries to approach Marcus, to tell him what she found, but a police officer steps in front of her, a middle-aged white man with a thick mustache who introduces himself as Detective Barnes. He asks her to step into a private waiting room and she follows him because she has no choice, and he pulls out a notebook and asks her to explain what happened. Diane tells him everything, how she could not sleep tonight, how she often came to the estate late to work when the insomnia was bad, how she went to the garden shed to get supplies for tomorrow's cleaning, how she saw the disturbed earth and the fresh roses and knew something was wrong, how she found Elijah buried in a crate 6 feet deep. Detective Barnes writes everything down in careful block letters and asks her why she was at the estate at 2 in the morning if she was not scheduled to work until 8. Diane explains again about the insomnia, about how Mr. Chen had given her a key years ago and told her she could come and go as needed, about how she sometimes did laundry or organized closets late at night when she could not sleep in her empty apartment. Barnes nods, but his eyes are skeptical, and Diane feels the first cold touch of fear in her stomach. Veronica appears in the doorway of the waiting room, her face arranged in perfect sympathy, and she says, "Detective Barnes, I think there is something you should know. Diane has been under tremendous stress lately, She asked for time off last week and seemed very agitated. I have been worried about her mental state. Marcus, remember how upset she seemed at dinner, how she pulled Elijah aside rather roughly when he spilled his juice. Diane's mouth falls open because this is not true. None of this is true. She never pulled Elijah roughly. She helped him clean up the spill and told him accidents happen. And she never asked Veronica for time off. She asked Marcus directly, and he said yes without question. But before she can protest, a doctor enters the waiting room, a young Indian-American woman with tired eyes, and she says Elijah is stable, but it was very close. He was buried alive. There is no question about that. Someone choked him unconscious first, based on the bruising around his neck, and then buried him in that crate. This was attempted murder. Detective Barnes' expression hardens, and he asks the doctor how long Elijah was buried, and the doctor says, based on the dirt in his lungs and the oxygen deprivation, probably 45 minutes to an hour, any longer, and he would have died. Barnes turns to Diane and asks her again about her timeline. What time did she arrive at the estate? What time did she find Elijah? And Diane answers honestly. She arrived around 1:30 in the morning. She found him around 2. She called 911 immediately. Barnes asks who else had access to the property tonight, and Marcus says just family and staff. The rehearsal dinner ended at 11, and all the guests left by 11:30. Only he and Veronica and the household staff remained. Veronica steps forward and says, "Actually, Detective, I need to tell you something. I saw Diane acting very strangely during the rehearsal dinner. She kept watching Elijah with this intense look, and when I asked her to bring more champagne, she snapped at me, which was very unlike her. And then later, I saw her pull Elijah into the hallway and speak to him in a harsh whisper. I could not hear what she said, but the boy looked frightened." Marcus turns to look at Diane, and there is something new in his eyes, something that looks like doubt, and Diane feels the world tilting beneath her feet, because she understands now what is happening. She is being framed for a crime she did not commit, and the woman doing the framing is standing right there with her hand on Marcus' arm and concern painted on her beautiful face like a mask. The hospital waiting room feels smaller with each passing minute, as Detective Barnes separates everyone for individual questioning, and when he calls Diane into a conference room down the hall, she follows him on legs that feel like water. He closes the door and asks her to sit, and then he places an evidence bag on the table between them. Inside the bag is a key, an old brass key that Diane recognizes immediately as the key to the garden shed. And Barnes says, "We found this in your uniform pocket. Can you explain why you had the key to the shed where Elijah was buried?" Diane stares at the key and her mind races because she did not have that key. Her master key ring that opens all the doors on the estate is missing. She noticed it was gone yesterday afternoon, but thought she had misplaced it in one of the many rooms she cleaned. She tells Barnes this, and he writes it down, but she can see he does not believe her. And then he shows her something else. Security footage from the estate cameras pulled up on his laptop. The timestamp reads 11:47 the previous night, and there is Diane walking across the lawn toward the garden area, and then another clip stamped 11:52 showing her walking back toward the main house. Barnes says you were near the garden shed at 11:47, just 5 minutes before you claim you left for the night. What were you doing there? Diane thinks hard and remembers. She went to the garden that evening to get fresh flowers for the breakfast room, Mr. Chen liked fresh flowers every morning, and she spent 5 minutes cutting roses and dahlias and then returned to arrange them in vases. This was normal. This was part of her routine. But then Barnes shows her another clip, and this one is stamped 1:15 in the morning, and there is Diane again near the shed, and he says this was 90 minutes before you called 911. What were you doing during that time? Diane says that was when she arrived and went to get cleaning supplies. She was only there for 5 minutes before she saw the disturbed earth. But Barnes points out that the timestamp shows she was there much earlier, that she had plenty of time to bury someone and then pretend to discover them. Diane feels panic rising in her throat, and she says someone is manipulating these timestamps. Someone is setting me up. Please, you have to believe me. But Barnes just looks at her with that flat cop expression that gives nothing away. There is a knock on the door, and another officer enters, a young woman who hands Barnes a folder, and he opens it and reads for a long moment before looking up at Diane. He says multiple staff members have given statements about your behavior. They say you were possessive of Elijah. that you often overstepped your boundaries as household staff, that you seemed jealous when Miss Ashford moved into the house and began spending time with the boy. Diane cannot breathe because this is a nightmare. This cannot be real. Those people who she worked alongside for 8 years are now saying these things about her, and she wonders what Veronica said to them, what threats or promises she made. Barnes continues. Miss Ashford states that you told her directly that you did not think she was good enough for Mr. Chen or for Elijah, that you said she did not understand what that boy needed. Do you remember saying that? Diane did say something like that, but not the way Veronica is making it sound. She said it with concern, because she saw how cold Veronica was to Elijah when Marcus was not around, how she called him Marcus' little project, how she treated him like an inconvenience rather than a child. But she can see how her words have been twisted into something ugly, something that sounds like jealousy or obsession. Marcus appears at the door looking exhausted, and he tells Barnes that he trusts Diane completely, that she has been with his family for 8 years, that she was there when his wife died, and she helped him through the grief, that she was the one who encouraged him to adopt Elijah after his wife's death left him broken. But then Marcus says something that makes Diane's heart crack. He says, "But I need to know the truth. My son almost died, and if there is any possibility that someone in my household did this, I have to know." Barnes tells Diane that she is a person of interest in this investigation, and she cannot leave the state of Connecticut, and then he says something worse. Child Protective Services has been called. There are concerns about whether Mr. Chen can maintain custody of Elijah, given the safety issues with his household staff. Diane stands up so fast her chair falls backward, and she says, "You cannot do that. You cannot take that boy away from his father. I would never hurt Elijah. I love that child." But her words sound desperate even to her own ears. Barnes says, "That is all for now, Miss Washington. But you are suspended from your position at the Chen estate, pending the outcome of this investigation, and security will escort you from the property." 2 security guards appear, and they are men she has known for years, Robert and James, who she brought Christmas cookies to every December, and they will not meet her eyes as they walk her through the hospital corridors toward the exit. Veronica is standing near the emergency room doors, and as Diane passes, she leans in close and whispers so quietly that only Diane can hear, "You should have stayed in your place. That boy never needed you. And now you are going to prison, and I am going to be Mrs. Marcus Chen, and you will be forgotten." Diane stops walking and turns to face Veronica, and for the first time she sees what is behind those beautiful blue eyes, something cold and calculating and completely empty of empathy. And she realizes this was all planned, every detail from the beginning. Veronica intended to frame her, and she has done it perfectly. The security guards take Diane's arms and guide her toward the exit, and she does not resist, because what would be the point? She has no power here. She is just the help, just a black woman who cleans other people's houses and takes care of other people's children, and the system is designed to grind people like her into dust. 3 days pass like 3 years in Diane's small 1-bedroom apartment in Stamford, where she sits on her worn sofa and watches her life fall apart on the television screen. The local news covers the story with the kind of breathless excitement that comes from scandal in wealthy communities, and the headline reads, "Housekeeper suspected in attempted murder of billionaire's son," and they show her employee photo from the Chen estate where she is smiling in her gray uniform, and below that they show a photo of Elijah from his 7th birthday party looking small and vulnerable. The news anchors speculate about motive, and they interview neighbors who say she always seemed quiet, too quiet, and you never know what is going on in someone's head. The online comments are worse. People she has never met writing the most vicious things, calling her an animal, saying she was jealous of the family she worked for, invoking every racist stereotype that has haunted black women for generations, saying she probably wanted to kidnap the boy for ransom or hurt him out of some twisted resentment. Diane stops reading after the first 100 comments because she cannot take any more, but the damage is done. Her name is now synonymous with attempted child murder in the minds of thousands of people. Her daughter Maya arrives from Boston University on the 4th day, having driven through the night when Diane finally called her and told her what happened. Maya is 19 years old and brilliant and fierce, with her father's determined jaw and her mother's careful eyes, and she wraps Diane in a hug that lasts 5 minutes, and then she says, "We are going to fight this. Mama, We are going to prove you are innocent." Together they sit at the kitchen table with Maya's laptop and begin investigating, and Diane tells Maya everything she remembers about Veronica over the past 6 months since she moved into the estate. Diane says Veronica was always cold to Elijah when Marcus was not around. She called him Marcus' little project. Once when she thought no one was listening, she said the adoption was a mistake, that Marcus only did it to fill the hole his wife left, and that the boy did not really belong in their family. Maya writes all this down, and then she says, "Tell me everything Elijah said about Veronica." And Diane remembers a conversation from 3 weeks ago when Elijah was helping her fold laundry, and he said, "Miss Veronica told me I am not really part of the family," she said. "I am just borrowing a life that does not belong to me." Diane had reported this to Marcus immediately, but he dismissed it, saying Veronica loves Elijah. She is just not used to children yet. She is learning how to be a stepmother. Maya types rapidly and says we need to find out more about Veronica, about who she was before she met Dad. And Diane is confused because Marcus is not Maya's father. Maya's father died of a heart attack when she was 12. But then she understands that Maya is thinking like an investigator, using the term generically. Maya searches online for Veronica Ashford and finds the expected results. Society page mentions, charity gala photos, her engagement announcement to Marcus 6 months ago, describing her as a former pharmaceutical executive. But then Maya digs deeper, searching for any mentions before the engagement, and she finds something strange. Veronica's LinkedIn profile only goes back 8 years. Before that there is nothing, no college information, no early career details, just a blank space where a person's history should be. Maya searches property records, court documents, anything that might give them more information. And finally, she finds an old news article from New Jersey dated 9 years ago about an engagement between a pharmaceutical executive named Robert Pemberton and a woman named Victoria Ashcroft. Maya clicks on the article and shows Diane the photo, and there is Veronica, younger and with darker hair, but definitely the same woman. And the article says Robert Pemberton, widowed father of one, announces his engagement to Victoria Ashcroft, a rising star in pharmaceutical research. Maya searches for follow-up articles and finds one from 8 months later, this one much shorter, stating that the engagement has been called off, no details provided. But then Maya finds something else, an obituary for Sarah Pemberton, aged 16, beloved daughter of Robert Pemberton, died in a tragic accident at home. The obituary is dated 7 months after the engagement announcement, 1 month before the engagement ended. Maya looks at Diane and says, "This is not a coincidence," and Diane agrees, so they keep searching. Maya finds a Reddit thread from 8 years ago discussing the Pemberton case, people speculating about what really happened, saying the daughter's death was suspicious, saying she fell down the stairs. But there were questions about bruising that did not match a fall, saying the investigation was shut down quickly when the Pemberton family lawyer got involved. One commenter writes, "I worked at the hospital where they brought Sarah, and I am telling you that girl did not die from a fall," but then the comment thread ends abruptly. Maya tries to find more information about the investigation, but it seems like everything was buried. No charges filed, case closed as accidental death, and Robert Pemberton moved to Europe 2 months later and has not been back to the United States since. Diane feels ice in her veins because she understands what they are looking at. Veronica has done this before, she has killed before, and she has gotten away with it. Maya's phone buzzes with a text message from an unknown number, and when she opens it, they both go still because the message reads, "Drop this. Take the deal they will offer you. Plead to negligence. Or your daughter is next." Diane snatches the phone and stares at the message and feels rage building behind her ribs because threatening her is one thing, but threatening Maya is something else entirely. The next morning, when Maya goes outside to drive to the grocery store, she finds all 4 of her car tires slashed, the rubber hanging in strips. And when she comes back inside, shaking, Diane calls the police, but they say it is probably random vandalism. These things happen. That afternoon, someone throws a brick through Diane's living room window, glass exploding across the carpet, and attached to the brick with rubber bands is a note written in block letters that says, "Guilty people should confess." Diane stands in the middle of her destroyed living room and realizes Veronica has powerful connections, people who will do whatever she asks, people who will threaten and intimidate and worse. The phone rings and Diane answers to find Marcus' lawyer on the line, a man named Howard Breslin who speaks in the careful, neutral tone of someone making a business proposal. He says, "Miss Washington, my client wants to resolve this matter quietly. We are prepared to offer you a deal. Plead guilty to reckless endangerment, serve 2 years minimum security, and receive a settlement of $200,000 in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and never speaking about this case again." Diane listens to this offer and understands exactly what it is: hush money, a payment to go away quietly and let Veronica win. She tells Breslin no thank you and hangs up. And Maya looks at her with wide eyes and says, "Mama, are you sure $200,000 could change our lives?" And Diane says, "Some things are more important than money, baby." And the truth is one of them. Diane cannot afford a good criminal defense attorney, so she is assigned a public defender from the Hartford office, a tired-looking white man in his 50s named James Morton, who meets with her in a windowless room at the courthouse in Stamford. Morton has 3 case files stacked in front of him and keeps checking his watch like he has somewhere more important to be, and when Diane finishes telling him her story, he sighs and says, "Miss Washington, I am going to be straight with you. This case is not winnable." He ticks off the evidence on his fingers: her presence at the estate late at night, the key found in her pocket, the security footage showing her near the scene, the testimony of multiple witnesses about her jealous and possessive behavior toward the child, the fact that she was the one who found the boy, which, in his experience, usually means the finder is the perpetrator. Diane interrupts him and says, "But I did not do this. Someone is framing me. Veronica Ashford is the one who buried Elijah, and she planted all this evidence to make it look like I did it." Morton gives her a look of such profound pity that it makes her want to scream, and he says, "Miss Washington, you are a black woman accused of trying to kill a child, and the only person you have to blame is a beautiful, wealthy white woman who is engaged to a billionaire. No jury in Connecticut is going to believe you. And even if they have doubts, the prosecutor will paint you as angry and resentful and jealous of the life this family has, and that narrative will stick because it is a narrative this country understands." He slides a document across the table and says, "Take the deal. 2 years is nothing. You will be out in 18 months with good behavior. You will have enough money to start over somewhere else. This is the best outcome you are going to get." Diane looks at the plea agreement, and then she looks at Morton, and she says, "I am not pleading guilty to something I did not do." And Morton shakes his head and says, "Then you are a fool. And I hope you are prepared to spend the next 15 to 20 years in prison, because that is what you are looking at if we go to trial." Meanwhile, at the Chen estate, Marcus is being slowly poisoned against Diane by Veronica's careful manipulation. She plants doubt disguised as concern, saying things like, "I know you want to believe in Diane, but we have to consider the evidence, and what if she really did snap under the stress? And think about what could have happened if she had succeeded." Veronica plays the role of traumatized, almost stepmother perfectly, visiting Elijah in the hospital every day with gifts and gentle words, and Elijah is too young and too confused to understand what is happening. The doctors say Elijah suffered partial amnesia from oxygen deprivation during the burial. His memory of the attack is fragmented and unreliable. He remembers being outside and then nothing, and then waking up in the hospital. Veronica sits beside his bed and asks him soft, leading questions. "Do you remember Diane seeming angry? Do you remember her acting strangely?" And Elijah frowns, trying to remember, but his memories are like water slipping through his fingers. Diane is barred by court order from seeing Elijah or coming within 500 feet of him, and this hurts worse than any of the other injustices because she knows that boy needs her and she cannot get to him. Maya takes a semester off from Boston University to help her mother, sacrificing her own future to fight for Diane's freedom, and together they become amateur detectives working from Diane's apartment. Maya discovers that Veronica legally changed her name 8 years ago from Victoria Ashcroft to Veronica Ashford, a subtle change but significant because it makes searching for her past much harder. Maya finds the court documents in New Jersey showing the name change, and the only reason given is personal preference. But Maya thinks there is more to it. People do not change their names without a reason. Maya keeps digging and finds that Victoria Ashcroft worked at a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Therapeutics in Princeton from 15 years ago until 8 years ago, when she left under circumstances that are not explained in any public records. Maya searches news archives and finds a small article from 10 years ago about a whistleblower at Meridian Therapeutics who was planning to testify about illegal drug trials that resulted in patient deaths, and the whistleblower's name was Keisha Douglas, an African-American woman who worked in the clinical trials division. The article says Keisha was scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury, but disappeared the night before her testimony. Her car was found abandoned at a rest stop on the New Jersey Turnpike, and she was never seen again. The case went cold, and the investigation into Meridian Therapeutics was closed for lack of evidence. Maya shows this to Diane, and they both feel the pieces clicking together. Veronica was at that company when the whistleblower disappeared, and now Veronica is trying to silence Diane the same way. Maya tracks down Keisha Douglas' family through social media and finds her sister Carmen living in Newark, and Maya calls her and explains who she is and what is happening. Carmen Douglas agrees to meet them, and the next day, Maya and Diane drive to Newark and sit in Carmen's small apartment that smells like coffee and grief. Carmen is a heavy-set woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and sad eyes, and she says she has been waiting 10 years for someone to care about what happened to her sister. Carmen tells them that Keisha was terrified in the weeks before she disappeared. She said the people at Meridian were following her, that a woman named Victoria was particularly vicious, that Victoria had connections to some dangerous people who did the company's dirty work. Keisha told Carmen that she had evidence of falsified safety data that led to 12 deaths in clinical trials, that Victoria personally approved the fake data, and that Victoria threatened Keisha, saying she would disappear if she talked. Carmen reported all of this to the police after Keisha vanished, but they dismissed it as paranoid speculation. They said Keisha probably ran away to avoid testifying, that she got cold feet and started a new life somewhere else. But Carmen says Keisha would never abandon her 2 children. She loved those kids more than anything. Something terrible happened to her, and everyone knows it, but no one wants to admit it. Carmen goes to her closet and pulls down a cardboard box that she has kept for 10 years. Inside are documents that Keisha had copied and hidden, evidence of the falsified trials, emails between executives, and Carmen has been afraid to do anything with them because she does not want to end up like her sister. At the bottom of the box are photographs, surveillance photos that Keisha took of Victoria meeting with a man in a parking garage, and Carmen says Keisha told her this man's name was Derek Mosley, and he was Victoria's fixer, the one who made problems go away. Maya takes photos of everything with her phone, and they thank Carmen for her bravery and drive back to Connecticut with a new sense of purpose. That night, Diane is walking from her car to her apartment when she sees a man following her, and when she turns around, he is standing there in the parking lot, a large white man with a shaved head and cold eyes. He does not say anything, but he does not have to. His presence is the message, and Diane hurries inside and locks every lock on her door. She recognizes him from the photos in Carmen's box. This is Derek Mosley, and he wants her to know he is watching her. Diane sits in her apartment the next morning with all the evidence Maya has gathered, spread across the kitchen table, and she knows she has to take this to the police. This is proof that Veronica has a history of violence, that she has killed before, that she uses Derek Mosley to intimidate witnesses. Diane calls Detective Barnes and asks for a meeting, and he agrees reluctantly. And that afternoon, Diane goes to the Stamford Police Department with Maya, and they present everything to Barnes in an interview room. Barnes listens and looks through the documents and the photos, but his expression remains skeptical, and when they finish, he says, "Miss Washington, I understand you are desperate, but you need to focus on your own case. Bringing up unrelated incidents from years ago is not going to help you, it just makes you look like you are grasping at straws." Diane wants to scream because how can he not see the pattern? How can he dismiss this evidence? But then Barnes tells her something that makes her stomach drop. "We found more evidence against you. Your fingerprints are on the shovel that was used to dig the hole where Elijah was buried." Diane says that is impossible. "I never touched that shovel." And Barnes says the forensics team found the shovel in the garden shed covered in dirt with your fingerprints on the handle. How do you explain that? Diane thinks frantically and realizes Veronica must have stolen her work gloves, the ones she used every day for gardening and outdoor work. Veronica used those gloves to hold the shovel and then left the shovel where police would find it. She tells Barnes this, and he writes it down, but she can see he thinks she is making excuses. Barnes says your preliminary hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. If the judge finds sufficient evidence, you will be bound over for trial. And Miss Washington, I am going to tell you the same thing your lawyer probably told you. Take the deal, because if this goes to trial, you are going to lose. Diane leaves the police station feeling like she is drowning, and the shore is getting farther away. The media coverage intensifies as the preliminary hearing approaches. The district attorney Ellen Richards gives a press conference on the courthouse steps, talking about justice for Elijah and holding criminals accountable, and Richards is a thin blonde woman in her 40s who is running for re-election and sees this case as a way to boost her law and order credentials. Protesters gather outside the courthouse with signs that say, "Justice for Elijah," and they hold up Diane's photo from the news with the word "guilty" written across it in red marker, and Diane watches this on television and wonders how her life became a spectacle for strangers. Her church community splits down the middle. Half the congregation believes in her innocence and brings her food and offers prayers. The other half whispers behind her back and avoids her eyes on Sundays. Diane stops going to church because she cannot bear the weight of their judgment. Her landlord, a nervous man named Mr. Kowalski, who has rented to her for 6 years, leaves a notice on her door saying he is beginning eviction proceedings because her presence in the building is making other tenants uncomfortable, and Diane knows someone has pressured him. Someone has made it worth his while to get rid of her. Marcus Chen holds a press conference outside Greenwich Hospital with Veronica standing beside him in a tasteful black dress. And Marcus says he trusts the justice system to find the truth, that he is focused on his son's recovery, and that he and Veronica have decided to postpone their wedding until this nightmare is over. Veronica touches Marcus' arm with perfect timing and says, "We just want Elijah to feel safe again," and the cameras eat it up. Maya loses her part-time job at a coffee shop near Boston University when the owner sees her mother's case on the news and decides he does not want that kind of publicity associated with his business. Diane sits in her apartment that night and takes stock of what she has lost: her job, her home, her reputation, her daughter's education, her place in the community. Everything she spent 42 years building has been destroyed in 2 weeks. She thinks about the plea deal and wonders if Morton was right, if prison would at least give her a kind of peace, a place where the fight would be over, and she could just exist without the constant pressure of proving her innocence. But then she thinks about Elijah, and what it would mean for him to grow up believing the woman who loved him tried to kill him. And she thinks about Maya, who is sacrificing everything to help her, and she thinks about Keisha Douglas, who disappeared fighting the same woman, and she knows she cannot give up. At midnight, Diane's phone buzzes with an email from an unknown address. The subject line is blank, and when she opens it, there is a video file attached. Diane's hands shake as she downloads the file and presses play, and what she sees makes her gasp out loud. The video is grainy and shot from a distance, but it clearly shows the Chen estate garden at night. The timestamp reads 11:23 p.m. the night of the rehearsal dinner. And there is Veronica, walking across the lawn carrying something in her arms. Something small and limp, wrapped in a blanket. Veronica disappears into the garden shed, and the video continues for 10 minutes, showing nothing but the closed shed door. And then Veronica emerges alone, her hands dirty, her expression cold and satisfied. She walks back toward the main house and the video ends. Diane watches the video 3 more times and then calls Maya, who comes running from her bedroom, and together they watch it again. Maya says, "This is it. This is proof. We can take this to the police and they will have to believe you." But then Maya examines the video file more carefully, checking the metadata, and her face falls. She says, "Mama, the quality is terrible, and any defense lawyer will argue this could be doctored or edited, and the timestamp could be manipulated. This is not going to be enough on its own." Diane feels hope and despair warring in her chest because, yes, this is evidence, but will anyone believe it, or will they say she fabricated it out of desperation? The email contains no message except one line at the very end. "This is just the beginning. She has done this before." Check the Pemberton House security archives from 2021. Diane reads this and understands. Someone else knows what Veronica did. Someone is trying to help her, but who and why? Maya spends the next 2 days trying to trace the email, but it was sent through multiple VPN servers that mask the origin. Whoever sent it knows what they are doing and does not want to be found. But the message mentioned security archives from the Pemberton house, and Maya thinks if they can get that footage, it might show what really happened to Sarah Pemberton. It might prove Veronica has a pattern of violence. Maya hacks into public records. She is good with computers, always has been, and she finds the address of Robert Pemberton's former estate in Alpine, New Jersey, a massive property that has been vacant since he moved to Europe. Maya also discovers through her Boston University connections a graduate student who specializes in digital security systems, and for $200, he tells Maya that most high-end security systems from that era backed up footage to cloud servers that stay active even if the house is empty. Maya and Diane drive to New Jersey on a cold morning and park down the street from the Pemberton estate, and they wait until dark to approach the property. The gate is locked, but there is a gap in the fence where tree roots have pushed the metal aside, and they slip through and make their way across the overgrown lawn to the main house. The house is huge and dark, windows boarded up, no sign of life, and Diane feels like a criminal as they search for a way inside, even though they are breaking the law to prove they are not criminals. The irony is not lost on her. They find a basement window that has been broken by vandals, and they squeeze through, dropping into a dusty wine cellar that smells of mold and abandonment. Maya uses her phone flashlight to navigate through the basement to the security room where banks of monitors still sit on metal shelves, and Maya connects her laptop to the system and starts searching the archives. It takes an hour, but finally she finds the footage from the night Sarah Pemberton died 3 years ago, and they watch the video together in that dark basement with their hearts pounding. The footage shows Sarah at the top of the main staircase arguing with someone off camera, and then Veronica steps into frame and pushes Sarah hard with both hands, and Sarah tumbles backward down the stairs in a way that is clearly not an accident. Veronica walks down the stairs after her, checks Sarah's pulse, and then calmly walks away. Maya downloads the footage to her laptop and they have it. They have proof that Veronica murdered Sarah Pemberton. This changes everything. But as Maya is disconnecting her laptop, they hear a noise from upstairs, footsteps moving through the abandoned house, and Diane grabs Maya's arm and whispers, "We have to go." They move toward the basement window, but before they reach it, a man appears blocking their path, and in the beam of Maya's flashlight, Diane recognizes Derek Mosley. Mosley smiles, and it is the kind of smile that promises violence, and he says, "You two have been very busy, poking around in things that do not concern you, and now you have made my job very easy." He steps toward them, and Maya throws her laptop at him, and it hits him in the chest, but barely slows him down, and the laptop falls to the concrete floor and cracks open, the hard drive exposed. Diane puts herself between Mosley and Maya and says, "Run, baby, run now." But Mosley is faster than he looks, and he grabs Maya by her jacket and throws her against the wall. Diane feels rage erupt inside her, and she launches herself at Mosley, clawing at his face, and he backhands her, and she tastes blood, but she does not stop. She grabs a wine bottle from a broken rack and swings it at his head. The bottle shatters against his skull, and he staggers, and Diane grabs Maya, and they run through the basement, Mosley cursing behind them. Diane knows houses like this. She has cleaned dozens of estates, just like the Pemberton mansion, and she knows there will be servant stairs, narrow passages that connect the basement to the upper floors, passages that the wealthy never use, but that staff know intimately. She finds the servant door and pulls Maya through, and they run up the narrow staircase in darkness, their breath loud in the confined space. They emerge on the second floor, and Diane hears Mosley behind them, his heavy footsteps echoing, and she pulls Maya into what used to be a bedroom, and they push a dresser in front of the door. Diane looks around for another exit and sees a dumbwaiter, an old-fashioned service elevator used to transport laundry between floors, and she knows this is a long shot, but they have no choice. She and Maya squeeze into the dumbwaiter. It is barely big enough for both of them, and Diane pulls the rope and they descend jerkily toward the basement, the ancient mechanism groaning. They reach the bottom and tumble out into the wine cellar just as Mosley breaks through the bedroom door above them. Diane sees the broken window they entered through, and she and Maya scramble toward it, climbing through just as Mosley reaches the basement. They run across the lawn toward the fence, and Diane hears Mosley behind them, but they are faster, fear giving them speed, and they squeeze through the gap in the fence and sprint to their car. Maya's hands shake as she tries to start the engine, and finally, it catches, and they peel away from the curb, and Diane looks back to see Mosley standing in the street watching them. They drive in silence for 10 minutes before Maya starts crying and says, "Mama, the laptop, the footage, it is gone. Mosley destroyed it." Diane reaches over and takes Maya's hand and says, "We are alive, baby. That is what matters. We will find another way." But inside, Diane feels despair because the evidence is destroyed, and they are back where they started. They drive back to Connecticut, and as they cross the state line, police lights flash behind them, and Diane's heart sinks because she knows what is coming. They pull over, and 2 Stamford police officers approach the car and tell Diane she is under arrest for breaking and entering and assault. Derek Mosley called it in, and even though Mosley is the one who attacked them, even though they were defending themselves, the system believes him over them, because that is how the system works. Diane is handcuffed and put in the back of the police cruiser, and Maya follows them to the station in tears. Diane spends the night in a cell at Stamford Police Department. The metal bench is cold, and the fluorescent lights never turn off, and she does not sleep. In the morning, she is brought before a judge for arraignment on the new charges, and the prosecutor asks for bail to be set at $500,000, given Diane's flight risk and her escalating criminal behavior. Diane's public defender Morton argues half-heartedly for a lower amount, but the judge sets bail at $500,000, and Diane knows she cannot pay it. She does not have that kind of money, and so she will sit in jail until trial. Her trial date for the attempted murder charge is moved up. The prosecutor, Ellen Richards, wants to capitalize on the new charges to paint Diane as a dangerous criminal, and the trial is now set for 3 weeks away. Marcus Chen comes to visit Diane in jail 2 days later, and they sit across from each other in a small room with a guard watching from the corner. Marcus looks older than his 45 years. There are new lines around his eyes, and his hands shake slightly as he folds them on the table. He says, "Diane, I do not know what to believe anymore. All the evidence points to you, but my heart says you would never hurt Elijah. Help me understand what is happening." Diane tells him everything, all the evidence she and Maya have gathered about Veronica's past, about Sarah Pemberton and Keisha Douglas, about Derek Mosley, and the pattern of violence that follows Veronica wherever she goes. She tells him about the video they found, showing Veronica carrying Elijah to the shed, about the security footage from the Pemberton house that showed Veronica murdering Sarah, about how Mosley destroyed the evidence. Marcus listens, and she can see he wants to believe her. But doubt has been planted so deep by Veronica's manipulation that he cannot fully accept what Diane is saying. He tells her something that gives her a sliver of hope. He says, "Elijah's memory is starting to come back in fragments. He has been having nightmares about someone with cold hands, about flowers that smelled too strong, about dirt in his mouth." The doctors say the memories might be unreliable because of the trauma. But Marcus thinks Elijah is remembering what really happened. He just cannot articulate it clearly. Diane says you have to protect him from Veronica. Do not leave them alone together. But Marcus says Veronica has been wonderful with Elijah. She visits him every day at the hospital, she reads to him, and brings him toys. Diane wants to scream because she knows what Veronica is doing. She is planting false memories. She is making sure that if Elijah does remember the truth, he will doubt himself. Marcus stands to leave, and Diane reaches across the table and grabs his hand and says, "Marcus, please, look into Veronica's eyes the next time she does not know you are watching. Look at what is really there, and you will see I am telling the truth." Marcus pulls his hand away gently and says, "I will think about what you said," and then he is gone. In jail, Diane meets another woman, a Latina woman in her 50s named Rosa Martinez, who is awaiting trial for theft charges after her employer accused her of stealing jewelry. Rosa tells Diane her story over terrible jail food in the common area, how she worked for a wealthy family in Westport for 15 years, how the wife never liked her, how one day jewelry went missing and Rosa was immediately blamed even though she never took anything. Rosa could not afford a good lawyer, and the evidence against her was circumstantial but convincing, and she took a plea deal for 2 years because she was afraid of getting more time if she went to trial. Rosa says to Diane, Rich people have all the power. They can destroy us whenever they want. The system is built to believe them over us. Sometimes the only way to win is to make them destroy themselves. Diane thinks about this, and an idea begins to form. If she cannot prove Veronica is guilty through evidence, then maybe she can get Veronica to confess. Narcissists like Veronica cannot resist bragging when they think they have won. Maya and Li Wei come to visit Diane together 3 days later, and Diane is confused because she has never met Li Wei before. Li Wei is a petite young woman with intelligent eyes, and she looks nervous as she sits across from Diane in the visitation room. Li Wei introduces herself as Marcus Chen's executive assistant, and she says, "I am the one who sent you the video. I have been trying to help you from the beginning." Diane asks why, and Li Wei's eyes fill with tears as she tells her story. Her older brother Kevin worked at Meridian Therapeutics with Victoria 10 years ago. He was a lab technician who was forced to falsify safety data under Victoria's orders, and when the trials resulted in patient deaths, Kevin was consumed by guilt and killed himself 2 years later. Li Wei has spent the last 8 years investigating Victoria. She took the job with Marcus specifically to get close to her, and she has been planting hidden cameras throughout the Chen estate to gather evidence. She has footage of Veronica burying Elijah, footage of Veronica planting evidence in Diane's uniform, footage of Veronica laughing about framing the help. But Li Wei is also being blackmailed. Veronica discovered her investigation 6 months ago and threatened to destroy her brother's reputation publicly, to leak stories that Kevin was unstable and violent, to make sure his memory was tarnished forever, unless Li Wei stopped investigating. Li Wei has been paralyzed by fear, but watching Diane suffer has given her courage to act. Maya says we have a plan. We are going to stage a fake news interview with Veronica. We will create a fake website for a major news network and reach out to Veronica, saying they want to interview her about surviving the trauma of a staff member's betrayal. Li Wei says Veronica cannot resist media attention. She will agree to the interview, and narcissists always slip up when they think they are winning. She will say something incriminating if we ask the right questions. Diane says, but we need Marcus' cooperation. We need him to see the truth about Veronica. And Li Wei says Elijah is the key. If Elijah remembers and tells his father the truth, then Marcus will finally believe. But Diane is in jail and cannot get to Elijah. There is a court order keeping her 500 feet away from him. If she violates it, she will go back to jail immediately and permanently. Diane thinks about this and makes a decision that might cost her everything. She says, I am going to plead guilty to the breaking and entering charge. It will get me out on bail, and then I will go to Elijah, even if it means I will never get out of jail again. That boy needs to know I believe him, and that he can trust his memories. Maya protests, but Diane is firm. Some things are more important than freedom, and saving Elijah from Veronica is one of them. The next day, Diane pleads guilty to the breaking and entering charge and criminal trespass, and is released on bail after her church community pools their money to pay the bond, and she has 72 hours before she must report back to jail for sentencing. In those 72 hours, everything must be resolved, or Diane will lose everything forever. On the first night of freedom, Diane waits until midnight, and then drives to Greenwich Hospital, where Elijah is still being monitored for lingering effects of oxygen deprivation. She wears scrubs she borrowed from a former co-worker and a surgical mask and pulls her hair back under a cap, and she walks through the hospital corridors with the confidence of someone who belongs there. She reaches Elijah's private room on the pediatric floor and slips inside, her heart pounding so hard she thinks the security guards will hear it. Elijah is asleep in the hospital bed. He looks so small under the white blankets, and Diane approaches quietly and sits in the chair beside his bed. She touches his hand gently, and his eyes flutter open, and for a moment he looks confused, and then he sees her face, and his eyes go wide. He whispers Miss Diane, and she puts her finger to her lips and says, "Yes, baby. It is me. I came to see you." Elijah's eyes fill with tears, and he says, "Miss Veronica told me you tried to hurt me. She said you were angry at me. But I did not believe her because you would never hurt me." Diane feels her own tears falling, and she says, "That is right, baby. I would never hurt you, and I need you to tell me what you remember about that night." Elijah frowns and says, "I remember being at the rehearsal dinner, and then I went outside to look at the stars, like Daddy and I always do, And then Miss Veronica came outside and she said Daddy wanted to talk to me in the garden shed. I followed her and she gave me cookies and I ate them and they tasted funny and then everything went fuzzy. Diane asks what happened next and Elijah closes his eyes trying to remember and says, I remember her hands on my neck and they were so cold and I could not breathe. And then I woke up and there was dirt everywhere and I could not move and I was so scared. He is crying now and Diane pulls him into her arms and says, You are so brave, Elijah, so brave. And what you remember is real. Miss Veronica did this to you and she tried to blame me, but we are going to stop her. Elijah says, I tried to tell Daddy, but Miss Veronica said my memories were confused because of being sick, and Daddy believes her because she is always nice when he is around. Diane pulls out her phone and starts recording, and asks Elijah to tell her again what he remembers, and this time he speaks clearly and calmly, describing how Veronica drugged him with cookies laced with sleeping pills, how she choked him until he passed out, how he woke up buried in dirt. It is the testimony of a 7-year-old boy, but it is powerful and true, and Diane knows this will matter. Hospital security enters the room before she can finish. 2 guards who have been alerted to an unauthorized visitor, and they grab Diane's arms and start to pull her away. Elijah screams, No, leave her alone, she did not hurt me. But the guards do not listen and Diane is dragged from the room and down to the security office where the police are called. Detective Barnes arrives and he looks exhausted and disappointed and he says, Miss Washington, you violated a court order, you are going back to jail, and this time there is no bail. Diane shows him the video she recorded of Elijah's testimony, but Barnes says a child's statement is not admissible without proper protocols. You have contaminated any potential testimony by approaching him directly. This is worthless in court. Diane is handcuffed and put in a police car, but before they drive away, she sees Marcus arrive at the hospital. He must have been called about the security breach, and their eyes meet through the car window, and she sees something shift in his expression. A crack in the wall Veronica has built around him. At the Chen estate that same night, Marcus cannot sleep. Diane's words keep echoing in his head. Look into Veronica's eyes when she does not know you are watching. He gets out of bed and walks through the dark house and finds Veronica in his study on her laptop, and she does not know he is there. Marcus watches her from the doorway and sees an expression on her face he has never seen before, something calculating and cold. And she is looking at financial records from his charitable foundation, the one that funded Elijah's adoption and supports dozens of other children. Marcus steps into the room and Veronica closes the laptop quickly and smiles at him with warmth that now seems fake, and she says, Darling, what are you doing up? Marcus says, I need to talk to you about the foundation finances. There are some discrepancies I do not understand. And he watches her face carefully. Veronica's smile does not waver, but her eyes go hard for just a second, and Marcus sees it, sees the mask slip, and he knows in that moment that Diane was telling the truth about everything. He says, I had my accountant review the records and there is money missing, $3 million over the past 6 months, and the withdrawals are tied to your access codes. Veronica stands up, and her voice is smooth and reasonable, and she says, Marcus, there is an explanation for everything. I moved some funds around for better investment returns. I was going to tell you, but there has been so much stress with the Diane situation. Marcus looks at her and says, The Diane situation? Is that what you call my son almost being murdered? Veronica's face changes, the warmth draining away, and she says that woman tried to kill Elijah. Or have you forgotten? Marcus says, I have not forgotten anything. In fact, I am starting to remember things I should have paid attention to, like how cold you were to Elijah when you thought I was not watching, like how you always had an explanation for why Diane was unsuitable, like how convenient it was that all the evidence pointed to her. Veronica laughs, and it is not a pleasant sound, and she says, Marcus, you are being paranoid. Diane has poisoned you against me, just like I warned you she would. Marcus pulls out his phone and says, I spoke to Robert Pemberton this afternoon. I called him in London and asked him about you and about his daughter Sarah. Veronica goes very still, and Marcus continues. He told me everything. How you killed Sarah, how you pushed her down the stairs because she did not want him to marry you, how he could not prove it but he knew it was you, how he paid you to leave and never come back. Veronica's mask drops completely, and what is underneath is something reptilian and empty. And Marcus takes a step back because he is looking at a stranger. She says that girl was a spoiled brat who needed to learn her place. Just like your precious Elijah, he was always going to be a problem for us. A constant reminder of your dead wife and your savior complex. Marcus says you tried to kill my son, and Veronica shrugs and says, I tried to solve a problem. If Diane had not found him, everyone would have thought he ran away. I even wrote a note in his handwriting. It would have been perfect. Marcus is recording this conversation on his phone. Li Wei taught him how to set up a hidden recording app, and he needs Veronica to keep talking. He says, why would you do this? Why would you hurt a child? And Veronica moves closer to him and says, because he does not fit in our future, Marcus. You and I are supposed to build something together, a dynasty, and we cannot do that with you, always looking backward at your dead wife and her replacement child. Marcus feels rage building in his chest and says, Elijah is my son, and Veronica laughs and says he is not your son. He is a project, an African-American boy you adopted to make yourself feel better about your white wife dying. You do not really love him. Marcus says you do not know anything about love, and Veronica says, I know you love me, I know you need me, and I know you will never use whatever recording you are making because my lawyers will destroy you in court and the public will believe me over some black housekeeper. She continues, emboldened by her own arrogance. Do you know how easy it is to make problems disappear? I have done it before. That Pemberton girl was so clumsy, and Keisha Douglas, she was so naive. She thought she could stand up to me, and look what happened. She is fertilizer somewhere on the New Jersey Turnpike. Veronica is confessing to everything, murder and embezzlement and conspiracy, and Marcus is capturing every word. But then Veronica sees his phone and realizes what he is doing, and she lunges for it, her face twisted with rage. Marcus pulls the phone away, and they struggle, and Veronica scratches at his face and screams, "Give me that phone," and Marcus pushes her away and she stumbles backward. The door bursts open, and police officers flood into the study. Detective Barnes and 4 uniformed officers, and Li Wei is behind them because she called them as soon as the confession started. She has been monitoring the house cameras remotely. Veronica screams, "This is entrapment. You cannot use any of this." But Barnes says we can and we will, and he reads her rights while handcuffing her. In the struggle, Marcus' phone falls to the floor and cracks, and the screen goes black and the recording is lost, the confession captured but now inaccessible. Marcus stares at the broken phone in horror, and Veronica laughs even with handcuffs on and says, "You have nothing. It is my word against yours, and everyone will believe me." She is dragged from the house still laughing, and Marcus sinks into a chair and puts his head in his hands because he finally knows the truth, but he cannot prove it, and Diane is still going to prison, and Veronica is going to get away with everything just like she always does. 1 week later, the courtroom in Stamford is packed with people, reporters, and curious citizens, and everyone who has followed this case from the beginning. Diane sits at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hands folded calmly in front of her, even though her heart is racing. The prosecutor, Ellen Richards, is preparing her closing arguments, supremely confident because the evidence against Diane is overwhelming, fingerprints and security footage and witness testimony all pointing to guilt. Veronica sits in the gallery surrounded by her expensive legal team. She was arrested but released on bail within hours, and she looks serene and untouchable in a cream-colored suit. Marcus sits on the opposite side of the courtroom with Elijah beside him. The boy is pale but determined, and he keeps looking at Diane with trust in his eyes. Judge Patricia Morrison calls the court to order and asks if the prosecution is ready to proceed, and Richard stands and says, "Yes, Your Honor, we are ready to present our sentencing recommendation for Miss Washington, who has pleaded guilty to multiple charges." Before Richards can continue, Li Wei stands up in the gallery and says, "Your Honor, I have new evidence that is relevant to this case." Judge Morrison frowns and says this is a sentencing hearing, not a trial. New evidence is not admissible at this stage. Li Wei says, "Your Honor, this evidence proves Miss Washington's innocence and identifies the real perpetrator, and I believe the court and the public deserve to see it." Morrison considers this and says, "Approach the bench," and Li Wei walks forward with her laptop. Richards objects loudly, but Morrison says, "I will allow it. If this evidence is as significant as you claim, then justice demands we examine it." Li Wei connects her laptop to the courtroom display system and says, "Your Honor, I am Marcus Chen's executive assistant, and for the past 6 months, I have been operating a comprehensive security system at the Chen estate, with cameras in every room and on every outdoor area. Morrison asks if Mr. Chen was aware of this surveillance, and Li Wei says not initially, but he knows now, and has given permission for this footage to be shown. Li Wei plays the first video, and it shows Veronica on the night of the rehearsal dinner carrying an unconscious Elijah across the lawn to the garden shed, and the courtroom erupts in gasps and shouts. Richards is on her feet objecting, but Morrison orders silence and says continue. Li Wei plays more footage, Veronica digging the hole and placing Elijah inside and covering him with dirt. Veronica planting the shed key in Diane's uniform pocket while Diane is in the laundry room. Veronica stealing Diane's work gloves and using them to hold the shovel so Diane's fingerprints would transfer. There is audio of Veronica meeting with Derek Mosley and paying him to threaten Diane and Maya. There is video of Veronica practicing her concerned fiancé expressions in the mirror and laughing about getting rid of that boy and that meddling maid. The courtroom is in chaos, people shouting and reporters typing frantically, and Veronica stands up and screams, "This is fake, this is all fabricated, how dare you?" But Li Wei is not finished. She plays the security footage from Marcus' study, showing Veronica's confession about killing Sarah Pemberton and Keisha Douglas, about embezzling millions from the foundation, about how she tried to frame Diane. The audio is crystal clear, every damning word captured in high definition, and Veronica tries to run, but bailiffs block the doors. She turns on Diane, and her face is pure hatred, and she screams, "You are nothing, you are just a maid, you are supposed to be invisible, how dare you challenge me, I should have buried you with that worthless child." The courtroom falls silent because everyone has heard it. Veronica has just confessed in open court in front of dozens of witnesses, and there is no way to take it back. Judge Morrison orders Veronica into custody immediately, and the bailiffs grab her arms, and she fights them screaming about her lawyers and her rights, and how she will destroy everyone. Detective Barnes stands in the gallery looking stunned, and he approaches Diane and says, "Miss Washington, I owe you an apology. I failed you in every possible way. I let my biases and assumptions blind me to the truth, and I am deeply sorry." Richards, the prosecutor, looks like she wants to disappear. Her re-election campaign is over before it began, and she quietly begins packing her briefcase. Morrison bangs her gavel and says, "All charges against Diane Washington are dismissed with prejudice. Miss Washington, you are free to go. And furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the handling of this case by the Stamford Police Department and the District Attorney's Office." The courtroom erupts in applause, and Diane stands on shaking legs, and Elijah breaks free from Marcus and runs to her and throws his arms around her waist. Diane holds him and cries and says, "You are safe now, baby. You are safe." And Marcus approaches with tears on his face and says, "Diane, I am so sorry. For everything. For doubting you. For not protecting you or my son. You saved his life, and I nearly destroyed yours." Diane looks at him and says, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do to make them right." And Marcus says, "Move back to the estate. Not as staff, as family, you and Maya. Elijah needs you, and so do I." Diane smiles and says, "Thank you, but no. I think it is time for me to build something of my own." 6 months pass, and the story shifts to a new courtroom where Veronica's trial concludes. She has been convicted on all counts: attempted murder of a child, first-degree murder of Sarah Pemberton, the first-degree murder of Keisha Douglas, whose body was finally found buried along the New Jersey Turnpike. Based on information, Veronica gave up trying to negotiate a plea deal, embezzlement, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges. The judge sentences her to life in prison without possibility of parole, and Veronica shows no emotion as she is led away in chains. But the real change happens after the trial, when Diane uses the media attention and the $1 million settlement she received from the police department and the prosecutor's office to launch a nonprofit called the Invisible Voices Foundation. The foundation provides free legal defense for domestic workers and service employees who are falsely accused of crimes by their employers, and it has already taken on 40 cases in its first 6 months. Maya runs the social media campaign, posting stories of workers who have been exploited and abused and vindicated, and the foundation's hashtag trends nationally every week. Li Wei serves as technical director. She uses her surveillance expertise to catch abusive employers and gather evidence of wrongdoing, and she has already helped convict 5 people of labor trafficking and false imprisonment. Carmen Douglas, Keisha's sister, joins as a victim's advocate. She counsels families who have lost loved ones to violence and helps them navigate the legal system. The Foundation's first major victory comes when they get Derek Mosley arrested and convicted for his role in intimidating witnesses and covering up Veronica's crimes, and he is sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Marcus Chen donates $10 million to the Foundation and serves on its board of directors, and he has become one of the loudest voices calling for reform of labor laws and protections for domestic workers. Diane is offered book deals and movie deals and speaking engagements at universities and conferences. Everyone wants to hear her story, but she turns them all down. Instead, she does something simpler and more revolutionary. She opens a housekeeping company called Visible Hands that pays fair wages, starting at $25 an hour, provides full health insurance and retirement benefits, and guarantees protections against discrimination and false accusations. Her first employee is Rosa Martinez, the woman she met in jail who was also falsely accused, and within 6 months the company has 30 employees and a waiting list of clients. Diane buys a small house in Stamford with her settlement money. Nothing fancy, but it is hers, and she fills it with photos of Maya and plants on every windowsill and books on every surface. On a Saturday afternoon, she drives to the Chen estate for Elijah's 8th birthday party. She does not live there anymore, but she visits often because Elijah needs her in his life, and she needs him in hers. The party is in the back garden, and Marcus has invited all of Elijah's school friends, and there is a bouncer and a magician, and more cake than 20 children could possibly eat. Elijah sees Diane arrive and runs to her and hugs her tight, and says, "Miss Diane, I am so glad you are here." They walk through the garden together, and Elijah shows her the vegetable patch he planted where the roses used to be. He says, "I wanted to grow things that give life, instead of just looking pretty," and Diane thinks this boy is wise beyond his years. Elijah asks her a question that has clearly been on his mind. He says, "Miss Diane, do you ever get scared anymore? Do you have nightmares about what happened?" Diane kneels down so she is eye level with him and says, "Every single day. Baby, I get scared every single day. But being scared and being stopped are 2 very different things. You can be afraid and still be brave. You can be hurt and still fight back. And that is what I want you to remember." Elijah thinks about this and says, "I want to be brave like you when I grow up." And Diane touches his cheek gently and says, "You already are. You were brave when you told the truth, even though it was hard. You are brave every day that you keep living and loving and trusting people, even after someone tried to hurt you." They sit on the grass and watch the other children play, and Diane looks around at the garden where everything almost ended, where she found Elijah buried and fighting for his life, where her own life was torn apart and rebuilt. The roses are gone now, replaced with tomatoes and peppers and herbs, plants that nourish rather than just decorate, and she thinks about how fitting that is. For 8 years she was invisible in this house, just another black woman, cleaning and cooking and caring for other people's lives, while her own remained small and constrained. But now her voice echoes across the country. Her story has changed laws and freed innocent people and given hope to thousands who thought the system would never work for them. The system tried to bury her the same way Veronica tried to bury Elijah. They tried to cover her up and silence her and make her disappear. But you cannot bury the truth forever. It always finds a way to rise to the surface. It always finds a way to breathe. Diane thinks about Keisha Douglas and Sarah Pemberton and all the other victims who never got their justice, and she makes a silent promise that she will keep fighting for them, that their stories will be told through the work of the Foundation. Maya joins her on the grass with a plate of birthday cake and says, "Mama, you did it, you changed everything." And Diane shakes her head and says, "We did it, baby. None of this happens without you, without Li Wei, without everyone who refused to give up." Marcus approaches with Elijah's birthday present, a new bike with training wheels, and he catches Diane's eye and mouths "thank you," and she nods because some things do not need words. The party continues around them, children laughing and playing, and Diane lets herself feel something she has not felt in months. She lets herself feel peace. The fight is not over. There will always be more cases, more workers who need help, more powerful people who think they can destroy the powerless without consequences. But today, in this garden, with this child who is alive because she refused to look away, Diane lets herself rest. She thinks about that night 6 months ago, when her flashlight beam caught that small hand pressing against dirt, when she made the choice to dig instead of walking away. And she knows that choice saved 2 lives that night, Elijah's and her own. Being invisible kept her safe for 42 years, but it also kept her small. And now that she has been seen, now that she has been heard, she can never go back to that small, quiet life, and she does not want to. The sun is setting over Greenwich, and the party is winding down, and Diane helps clean up because old habits die hard, and Marcus gently takes the trash bag from her hands and says, "You are a guest now. Let someone else clean up for once." Diane laughs and sits back down, and watches the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars Elijah was looking at the night Veronica attacked him, and she thinks about how darkness can hide terrible things, but it can also reveal beautiful ones. You just have to know where to look. Have you ever been in a situation where speaking up felt impossible because you thought no one would believe you? Have you witnessed injustice and wondered if one person could really make a difference? Diane's story shows us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is taking action despite the fear, and that our voices matter even when the world tries to silence them. If this story moved you, if you believe that every worker deserves dignity and protection, if you think the invisible people in our society deserve to be seen and heard, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. Hit that like button to support stories that shine a light on injustice and celebrate those who fight back against impossible odds. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that challenge us to be better and do better. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that their truth matters, that they have the power to change their own story and maybe change the world a little bit too. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring about the Dianes and Elijahs of the world who deserve so much better than what they are given. Remember that justice delayed is not justice denied if we refuse to stop fighting, and that every voice raised against injustice makes the chorus louder and harder to ignore. Stay brave, stay hopeful, and keep believing that truth always finds a way to breathe.